It. So I'm Adam Sampson. I'm Director of Clinical Operations here at Curebase, where we specialize in running clinical studies for digital therapeutics. So before I jump in, I would like to just give a little bit about my background. So I've spent the last 10 years in clinical research across quite a few different environments. So I actually began in the clinic working directly with patients, and moved into site operations and clinical research within a large multi-therapeutic research site, conducting from phase 1 through phase 3 studies. After that, moved into the CRO world and worked in a few different areas around project management, site management, and monitoring. I did spend a few years as well at a large academic health institution, conducting primarily government-funded clinical trials in the pediatric space, and also at a large pharmaceutical company where I was in charge of global late-phase clinical trials. So I really witnessed firsthand across that experience before coming to Curebase the limitations of today's kind of traditional clinical trial model. And here at Curebase, just really glad to be able to solve some of the solutions as is listed in the presentation title here, right? So patient engagement, so important in digital therapeutic trials, and how we can leverage these digital solutions and a virtual research team. So glad to share some of what we've learned here with this great group today. So as I alluded to, the traditional model of clinical trials is really has its limitations, primarily stemming from the fact that the traditional trial requires participants to travel from their home to the clinical site. Often it's a large institutional hospital or a smaller, dedicated research site. And this can be really challenging, especially in rural areas where patients might have to travel an hour or more just to the closest research site. So, and this barrier, it seems particularly unjustified in a digital therapeutics clinical trial, where therapy environment. So the virtual and hybrid model really works well in this space. Before I go too far, I would like to define quickly what we mean when we refer to virtual and hybrid trials. So traditional trials, of course, being much more straightforward, right? The patients come from their home to the dedicated research site, and that's where most of the study activities are done. With the virtual and hybrid trials, virtual trials, we take most of what is done at the traditional research site, and we're able to do it in a remote fashion through telemedicine and other modalities, email, text, video conference. We can also utilize mobile healthcare providers like mobile phlebotomists to conduct visits and activities within patients' homes. The hybrid model, as the name suggests, is a bit of a combination of the two. So in trials where, say, there's a complex dosing regimen, maybe IV needed, some of the visits might be done at the clinic in-house, and then you can leverage some of the virtual tools to accomplish some of those things that can be done via telemedicine or by sending folks to people's homes for certain visits. So a successful trial in this space, so to run your digital therapeutic clinical trial with this virtual model, really is heavily dependent on having a great virtual research team. So, qualified and trained professionals that know clinical research and have been trained on your protocol. So the team might vary depending on, the nature of the trial and the procedures required, but there's always going to be a study doctor who's going to be overseeing a team, oftentimes with a coordinator and other clinicians to support that effort. So in order to leverage this virtual research team, it's important not just to, you've got great digital tools and you've got the team, but patients need to be able to easily contact that team. So digital tools help, but training is really necessary so that this team understands it's critical that when the patient reaches out, they get a response quickly, or kind of the whole thing falls apart. So the term patient centricity, I'm sure you've heard it. It's commonly used in digital therapeutics and really across the healthcare spectrum. And I think one thing that all experts can kind of agree on from different domains is that to be patient-centric, you have to talk to patients. And that's actually surprisingly something that is not always done. In the clinical trial space, there's a lot of good intention around building protocols in such a way so that they're more patient-friendly. But that's often done with a group of researchers, sitting in a room and trying to imagine what that would be like for that particular population. And really, it's great if you can hear it from them directly. So I highly recommend, as part of your digital therapeutics clinical trial, early on, identify who your target population is and try and reach out to them and see if you can get some input. These days, there are patient advocacy groups and representatives for nearly every therapeutic area. And I've worked with a few of them. They're really great, and they oftentimes want to talk to you and to learn more about new treatments and to try and help develop things that might help with their condition. So you want to take this, and some things, you can define the user profile, right? What the preferences might be for this particular population. And then, of course, you want to take this and utilize this information for deciding which digital tools might fit best with the design of your study. A good way to think about this is to imagine the patient journey. So imagine, end to end, what's happening with the patient throughout your clinical trial as you're designing it, and try and see where the best places to insert some of these digital tools might be. Now, a real icing on the cake, if you're able, is to actually, before you finalize the digital tool that you're creating, whether it's an ePro, like a questionnaire or other digital modalities, go back to those patients that you talked to at the beginning and see if they might be willing to actually test the system out. Sometimes the smallest nuances and changes that patients might make can really have a big impact. And unfortunately, I've seen a number of good tools that were created by really smart researchers that ultimately, when patients started using them, they just they didn't quite have what they needed to be successful in the population. So save yourself some time on the back end by spending a little time on the front end and making sure that it's right. So another important thing for your digital therapeutics clinical trial is to, and really across, again, the patient spectrum, what do we hear? Patients want choice. They want to be able to choose where and when they're having these study procedures completed. So whenever you can, try and adapt the protocol early on in your engagement with participant representatives to suit the patient's lifestyle. And also try and build into your protocol wherever possible some ability for patients to choose how they complete some of the study activities. So this might mean, some patients might really like the fact that they can have the questionnaires to fill out on their own from the comfort of their home. Others might actually feel more comfortable in some sort of video conference with a clinician completing things. Some patients will really like the convenience of having a mobile phlebotomist come to their house and draw their blood, where others just feel more comfortable actually going to a physical location, a local provider, to have these procedures done. So, and again, this is an area where really the traditional site model is a bit limited in the breadth of options that can be offered. And the virtual and hybrid models provide some additional options around being able to do things in the home and do things digitally where possible. Again, important not to assume what patients would prefer. Just because it's visits are done in the patient home doesn't really make that patient-centric. The important thing is to understand what works best likely for your patient population. All right, and yeah, so you'll excuse me. I smile a bit every time I see this one, and that the idea is, we just technology is fantastic, but it's really important to keep in mind that technology should make things easier, not harder. And one way to do this is just to remember, whenever possible, not to have too many platforms, too many logins. I mean, we all have too many passwords. So this can be overwhelming to participants in clinical research studies. And whenever possible, try and reduce the number of platforms as low as possible. Even if you can get it down to a single platform, that's really ideal. What we're looking for here is, a single login or limited logins that a participant would have to complete everything that they would need for your digital therapeutics clinical trial. So this would be everything from consent at the beginning through data capture, scheduling their visits, completing their questionnaires via ePro, receiving their stipends, and even important things like safety event reporting with research staff can all be housed within one spot. Another way to reduce patient burden within clinical trials is to allow them to use their own devices whenever possible. So, years ago, we used to send patients home with these big, bulky tech gadgets in order to complete their questionnaires. And, to not always the best success, patients would, forget how to use them, leave them at home. Now most of us anyway, are walking around with smartphones in our pockets that have all the tech needed to support these different applications. So whenever you can, that's a great way to make patients feel more comfortable. Do keep in mind, though, that there are certain patient populations, geographics and demographic areas that are limited in that way and don't necessarily have the technology available. And for them, provisioning devices might actually be the right decision. So both of these things, right? So narrowing down to a limited number of technology platforms and allowing patients to use their own devices when possible is just a great way to make patients feel more at ease and increase the chances that they'll be better participants in your trial. So no matter which model for clinical trials you end up choosing, there's truly nothing more important than keeping your patients engaged with regular communication throughout the clinical trial and utilizing the mechanisms for communication that they most identify with. So oftentimes you'll actually see research teams now in recent days developing a specific patient communication plan for the study. Again, looking at the entire breadth of the study, the patient journey, and saying, all right, we know that we're going to be communicating with them at these specific points during the study activities, but sometimes there might be weeks or even months in between, long stretches between those visits, as clinical trials can go on for years sometimes. So you want to make sure that you have touch points, be it text message or other means through your digital tools, to be able to keep patients engaged and check in with them. A couple examples here, of course, right? So we might reach out via text message to remind a subject if they've forgotten to fill out their diary. We can pick up the phone and call them if we're having difficulty scheduling an appointment. And we can use email to share with them important documents that they should have for their records, such as the informed consent form. And the last big point that I'll hit on here, and really the thing that gets me most excited when using digital tools in a virtual setting and for digital therapeutic trials, is the ability now to, you have all these data coming in, right? So you're conducting your study in a virtual fashion. So everything, there's no paper, everything's coming in. All of that data are being collected and analyzed by your virtual research team. So what you want to do is make sure that you can draw insights in real time from those data and identify those points where it makes sense to actually reach out to patients. So patient level data to know. This is really this is a really important point that we can leverage for digital therapeutic trials in particular, because tracking compliance with digital therapeutics is much easier than it is, say, with a pill that people take at home and we rely on them to report to us. With a digital therapeutic, it's administered in a digital environment, and therefore tracking it becomes tracking compliance with treatment regimens becomes much easier. We can set thresholds and alerts so that the research team learns early on when things are changing, when doses are missed, and they can reach out to participants before these small issues become larger concerns. Now, this type of real-time patient-level data throughout, having that at your fingertips throughout the clinical trial it's somewhat new to our industry. That's been somewhat slow to embrace some of these new technologies, but it's really exciting. And I have to say, working with a virtual research team, that team can literally feel like they're sitting in the room with the patient if the right tools are chosen, set up, and used in the right way. So I do want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for any questions that are coming up in the chat box here. But before I get to that, I want to just make sure that I leave you with some really good key takeaways here. So the first one being make yourself available. So above all else, right, you can have the best tools and the best team, but if that team is not trained to adequately use those tools and patients are reaching out and they're not able to get a response quickly, then that can really interrupt that patient engagement and lead to greater issues down the road. Second, engage with patients early and often. So you want to try and identify your target population early on, understand what their particular needs might be, design your tools around that. And then throughout your clinical trial, you want to make sure that you're communicating with your patients regularly so that those long stretches in between visits don't end up becoming opportunities where your patients will fall off, forget about the study, and lose compliance with the digital therapy that's being provided. Third, provide patients with opportunities to participate where it's most comfortable for them. So whenever possible, build into your protocol opportunities for flexibility around where certain study activities can occur, be it mobile phlebotomist in the home or going to a local clinic to get a blood draw. Fourth, reduce technological friction. So in this sense, trying to make sure that you're not overwhelming patients with just far too many logins and platforms to use, and also allowing patients to use their own devices, to bring their own devices and use those is just a great way to make your patients feel like the study was designed around them and increase retention. And the last point here, leverage technology to understand conditions in real time. So this is a really powerful thing to be able to have the data that you need, to be able to visualize it, and to be able to take action before things really get out of hand and participants drop from the study or reach a point of treatment compliance where they're no longer able to be used in your final analysis.